I'm John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute, one of my favorite people because she works on freedom issues all over Colorado. But one of her specialties is remembering what happened in World War II by interviewing people who were actually there at the time. Kim Monson, thanks for being with me.
It's great to be here, John.
All right, so you do something not only on your radio show, but on your podcast and other things, all at kimmonson.com. Tell me why you take such an interest in our World War II and now some Vietnam vets.
Actually this all precipitated from a trip that I took in 2016 with a group that took 4 D-Day veterans back to Normandy for the 72nd celebration of D-Day. And as I'm walking around Normandy with these guys and hearing their stories and seeing the way they're revered by the people of France and Belgium and the Netherlands, came back to the States and said, we have got to tell these stories. So most of these guys are in their 90s. I've interviewed some that are over 100, which is pretty amazing. But each story is unique. And so within the spectrum of this big historical event, World War II, we started to capture these stories. And so I've had the great honor to interview probably over 130 World War II veterans.
130 of them. Mm-hmm. And you've captured all these interviews.
Yes.
So they're saved.
They are saved.
This is an important project, not just for our generation, but for other ones, because the stories, the texture, is something that we don't get. I've seen the films. I've seen the documentaries. I saw Saving Private Ryan. Great. But I have a feeling I'm missing some of this. Give me like your favorite story from one of these interviews.
Probably the first one would be Frank DeVita, who was one of the guys that I actually got to go to Normandy with in 2016. He was just a young 17-year-old kid, and he was operating the ramp on the Higgins boat, which was the boats that they brought into shore, and the ramp would come down and the guys would head on to the beach.
These are the amphibious things that would go
the
up.
landing craft.
It would open, and then you're open to the world to get shot at.
That's exactly right. And so there's about 30 guys on the Higgins boat. You have the operator, and then you have the ramp operator, the guy that's going to let the ramp down. And Frank said that they're coming in, they're taking on all kinds of fire. And they called the machine guns Hitler's typewriter, because you could hear that on the front of the boats. And the sides were wood. The only thing that was actually metal was the ramp. Yes.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Because I see the pictures, and I thought this was this wonderfully, tank-like vehicle. No, just the front.
And it was invented by a guy down in New Orleans. His last name was Higgins, so hence that's the name of the Higgins boats. And they needed to get them manufactured as fast as possible. So Frank said they're coming into shore, and he can hear the bullets hit the front, and he knew that when he would let the ramp down, that most of the guys were not going to make it.
Most. Not some. Most. And his job is to actually pull the lever, drop it, and watch these people die.
Exactly. And
at 17.
At the age of 17. And so he heard the command to drop the ramp, and he couldn't do it. And he heard another command, and he still didn't do it. And then the next one was command was given with great fervor, and he dropped the ramp. And I think only 3 of the 30 guys made it.
I can't imagine.
I know.
So a 17-year-old kid is there, and he knows this one action, this one thing, and watching 27 people die.
And he didn't just do it that time. Then they went back and they got another group. They came in.
They go back to where? The ship?
To the ship.
Okay.
Guys come down the side, they get in, and they head in. And he does it again, and I can't remember the death toll, but a few more guys survived. And then what started to happen, John, and I hadn't even really thought about this, is then they started to pick up the dead and the wounded, put them onto those Higgins boats, take the boats back. The guys that were going to get in the Higgins boat to go on to the beaches took these guys out, the dead and the wounded, and they got on those boats, and they went ahead and did it anyway.
17 years old. It blows my mind that they would have this experience. I met a World War II vet. He was a sailor, and he ran away from home at not yet 15. He ran away from home so he could enlist in the Navy. So several times his parents had to drive back to San Diego to pick him up and drag him back home because he wanted to serve. Now, I look back on that and I wonder, is this just, young guy being, I want to see the action, or was it patriotism that I need to save the nation? Finally, at 16, apparently his parents relented, signed the paper to let the kid go. I got a 17-year-old kid. I wouldn't sign that paper. I wouldn't sign that paper if you put a gun to my head. And still, there was a different thing. So what was the motivation? You've talked to over 100 of these heroes. What was the motivation for them to do this? Were they mostly drafted and they hadn't a choice, or did they want to go?
Most of the ones that I've talked to, it was because of love of country, to protect our country. We'd been attacked, and they wanted to go and protect our country. And some of them were drafted. The draft was at that time as well, and some of them. But the stories that you're just describing of young men lying to get in so that they could serve is absolutely astounding.
I mean, I would lie to get out of the situation. It doesn't register in my brain. And partly I look at things through political eyes, and I think about 14, 15, 16-year-old kids doing this duty, and now we're saying that adults at 18 can't buy a cigarette or a vape or have a drink.
Go figure.
Until they're 21, and you can stay on mommy's health care plan until you're 26. I'm thinking, did we not understand how young they were and they were still just as immature, or have we arrested development of kids today?
I think in some ways we've arrested development because, these guys came out of, it was the farms and the little towns and the cities, but they were coming out of an education system where they had an appreciation for the American idea of freedom and standing against tyranny. And I think they were much more mature. One of the veterans had said to me, us city boys, we didn't know how to do things like the farm boys did. They could fix anything, and we just really admired that. And so it brought all of them together.
That's amazing right there, because I find today that kids are mechanically inept. And it makes sense because they're very technically adaptive. They can do all sorts of software and this and that. Ask them to change the oil in the car, and it's not their fault. They haven't been raised that way. But even back then, there was a difference between country boys who had to fix the tractor and put up the barn, and city boys who didn't do that.
But they learned quickly. Interestingly enough, with Frank, he said that as he'd gone back and forth, this was really starting to wear on him. And
going back and forth
from Omaha Beach, and picking up guys and back and forth. And so finally, one of his commanders said, I tell you what, those German guns are going to get hot. And so they'll have to let them cool down just a little bit before they reload them. And when you hear that little silence, that will be the time to let the ramp down, and you're going to give our guys a few more seconds and to be able to make it to the beaches. And so that's what he did, and he actually started to have more success with that.
Do they still have scars from this? Do they have pride from this? Are they willing to talk to you about this? One of the things that we found, I know, after World War II, and I'm sure World War I and Korea, and it started to change a bit after Vietnam, is that soldiers would come home and they just kept their horrors to themselves. That has changed, I think, somewhat. But do they talk to you about the horrors of it?
I have to be really careful. I watch my questions, and if at some point in time I can feel that I'm getting too close, I'll pull back a bit. And so what Frank had done is these guys came back and didn't talk about it. It wasn't until 1977 did his family even know what he did. And then Tom Brokaw found
Really?
Yeah, Tom Brokaw found out about it. And Tom actually took Frank and a whole bunch of his family back to Normandy and did a whole story on it. So Frank's been back and forth to Denver several times, and come to find out, he was from New Jersey. He worked in the city in New York as a pattern maker in the clothing industry. And I've been in the clothing industry for many, many years. And I had worked with a company, a designer back in New York. And the owner of the company was a guy named Irving Spitalnik. And Irving was one of the partners with the Evans brothers when they started Evan Picone, if you're familiar with that. Okay.
Listen, if I can't pull it off the rack at JCPenney's, I don't know what it is.
Well, Evan Picone was one of the first women's designers back in the 60s to start to design pantsuits. And Irving had told me that they had put an ad in the New York Times that said, women shouldn't wear pants, but if they do, they should wear Evan Picone. And he said they got hate mail for that.
Really?
But it made it into a very successful company. So Frank is here Frank DeVita's here in Denver, and we're talking, and I said, I didn't realize you were in the clothing business, or the pattern making business. Did you know Irving? He said, did I? And so after all these years, we were also connected that way, which I found so interesting.
Why didn't they tell their families about these stories?
I think there was actually an order to not talk about it. And so once he finally let his family know, many times the family would say, so that's why Dad was quiet here, or that's why Dad was,
Right.
didn't sleep well at night. Oh, so now I understand.
Incredible. You've encapsulated all these people, and you have 130 of these stories and growing. I'm grateful you're taking the time to do this. These are treasures that need to be protected, and and you do it so well. I've heard it. People want to hear these stories. Where do they go?
Go to americasveteranstories.com, americasveteranstories.com. And we are working on getting everything. We did a rebrand a few months ago, and so we're still working on getting all of that back up there. But John, it's been my honor to get to do these stories, and it's truly changed my life. And
In what way?
There's times, I do this other show, 6 to 7 a.m., which Monday through Friday, get up early. And
On KLZ.
On KLZ 560. And, there's so much kind of craziness going on in the world right now. And I look at these stories and it's like, buck up, honey. If they can do that, you can do this,
The buck up, honey, 17 years old watching your friends, it blows my mind. And that's just one of the many stories. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It's really worth listening to these and anything you can do to help out. And are you looking for more veterans if people know them?
Absolutely. And probably the best place to email me is Kim@KimMonson, that's MONSON.com. And I have just amazing stories, and I'm just blessed with how I'm making these connections. The stories are rich. They're changing my life. We stand on the shoulders of giants.
I'm grateful for what you do. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.